We're talking about topics related to our second lesson in our series, the talk that Roland gave on the relational view of what it means to be made in the image of God. And we're going to be exploring some of what that has to say to the common good, what that has to say for how we treat each other. Roland, what on earth are we talking about?
We're talking a bit about that thing that I discussed at the end of the talk, where the philosophical view that I discussed at the end of the talk. So we defined two extremes of a spectrum. There was on the one side atomic individualism, and on the other side there was organic collectivism. And then in the middle, I just gave an example of something that's neither one of the outer extremes.
So there's two sides. Yeah. They're big words. Yeah. Do you maybe just want to give a quick run through of what they are again?
Yeah. Okay. Good idea. So
you can find a longer explanation in the video, but in the lesson. But let's just get everybody on the same page.
Yeah. Good call. So the fundamental question is, what is a community or what's a society, right? So when you have a group of individuals like working together, what is that thing? The atomic individualist says it's just the sum of its individual members, right? So that's it. And we'll give some examples of what that means, but that's basically what they say. It's just an aggregate of individual members. The organic collectivist says that when you have a society or a community like that, actually something new comes into existence that isn't any of its members. And so it's got these like weird properties that kind of make it exist by itself independently. And the third view that we articulated sort of in the middle between these two extremes is that the members somehow continuing to exist. They don't lose their individuality, but there is still a reality, a social reality like beyond them that isn't just the sum of them. So those are the three sorts of views that we're going to be looking at. Is that as clear as mud, or?
No, that's cool. That's cool. And if you want a bit more clarity as a listener, then you can go back to the lesson. The example that you used in the lesson was of a sports team for that middle view, and that was kind of, you've got the players who are on that team, but as a team they win the World Cup or whatever. They don't lose their individuality, but we still talk about them as a collective, as this other thing that comprises all of them.
Yeah, you can get at it by thinking particularly about the victory. So assuming they win, and you can say like, who does the victory belong to, right? You could say, well, it belongs to the team as a whole, and if new team members came later down the line, or maybe they weren't playing, they were on the sidelines, like in some sense the team that they belong to still won, even though it isn't the same set of members that were on the playing field playing.
Yeah.
But then in another sense, it doesn't belong to the whole and not to the individuals. Like each of those individual members participates in the victory that belongs to the team. They don't lose the individuality to the point where you can't attribute that victory to the individual members as well. And so it's sort of getting both the individualism and the collective aspect together in this interesting way. So the way that and you mentioned the word already, so the way that I think can be really helpful for thinking about these different things. What we want to do is just take a step towards a more precise understanding of what's going on in all of these things. Like, we've just given an example of this third view, but we haven't actually said what's going on. And we can't get into all the details. It's very complicated. It's been going on, this debate's been going on forever. But one way that we can make move in the direction of seeing what's going on is by thinking about the different ways that we can understand the term common good. This isn't arbitrary either. So I think we discussed this in our first practical theology module. But like the good of a thing is tied to the nature of a thing, or what it is to be a thing. So the more you understand about what's good for something, the more you understand about what that thing is, right? If you think, you can understand what a pianist is, but when you think about what a pianist is, you're thinking about what a good pianist does, right? You're not thinking about what a bad pianist does. Or when you think about a human, you're thinking about like a healthy human. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, cool.
The truest instance of that thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the filled out version of the nature. Yeah.
When we think pianist, we think somebody who knows how to play the piano, not like me, who just kind of tinkles.
Yeah. So then the common good, when we say common good, that is the good of a community. So if the better you understand a common good, the better you understand what it means to be a community in its fullest sense. And so depending on what you think a community is, you're going to have a different idea of what it means for a good to be common. So let's just go through the three views of common goods that align with the three views that we've already discussed, the two extremes and the one in the middle. So in the first sense, we could understand a common good as a cumulative good, right? So this would be where the good of the community is just the same good that exists in each member, maybe summed together. So some examples of this would be, we would say that a community is healthy if each of the individual members are healthy, or a community is wealthy if each of the individual members are wealthy. You could even talk about a community being like vaccinated, right? If each of the members are vaccinated, which is a very topical thing, in the current pandemic that we're living in. And it's not always just like it's healthy because each of the individual members. It's also like a sum. So you could talk about the sum of the wealth of the members. That's the wealth of the community. But it's really just whatever the members have, like, lumped together or accumulated together. So then sometimes it can be helpful to think about the opposite of what we're defining. So the opposite of a common good in this sense is a singular good. So it's what isn't aggregated is singular, right? And so that's sort of what you get. So it's what belongs to one person versus what belongs to the sum of multiple people. And this is pretty much what the atomic individualist thinks the common good of a community would be. Actually, the atomic individualist would say that all common goods of a community would be like this. Because obviously there's some goods that are common in this sense, right? Like I just gave some examples, being vaccinated, being healthy, being wealthy. But the atomic individualist says that the most fundamental goods of a community, most defining goods of a community are goods in this sense, cumulative goods.
Yeah.
Sometimes you hear people say the greatest good for the greatest number of people. That's conveying the same idea as this cumulative good.
So that's kind of where my mind was going, to that sort of consequentialist sort of idea that you're trying to maximize the amount of good. And what about goods that don't fit for all people? That you've got something that might be good for most people in the community, but there are a few that actually end up getting left by the wayside.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're going to take a hard line, not every atomic individualist needs to be a consequentialist like this, but if you were to go like super hard line, you could say like, well, we could make the community more healthy by killing off the unhealthy people, right?
Wow.
Obviously, that would be like that's extreme. I don't want to say that every atomic individualist would say that, but that would be like not. If you were going to go super hard line, then you could see like they would need to presuppose something like this and take a few more steps to get to that. But that's sort of what they need to be thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's common good in the first sense. Common good as cumulative good, and that is opposed to singular goods, right? The second sense would be the good of that the organic collectivists would have in mind, and this is a common good that we could call maybe a communal good. Okay, so these are goods that belong to the community at the cost of belonging to any of the individuals in that community. So with these goods, you kind of have to think of the community as like almost an individual by itself. And so then when a good belongs to the community, it's given up by the individuals in the community and given to the community as a separate, almost as like a quasi-individual that belongs to the community. That sounds kind of strange, but we're super familiar with these sorts of goods. So think of like a communal swimming pool, right? Or like a public park or just a communal piece of land. So what happens in these cases, like let's take a public park, no one owns that. It's owned by the state or the government or the municipality or whatever you would want to say. And they're not, as municipality, they're not the individual citizens that belong to the community. They are working on behalf of the community as such, not as individual citizens. And you can tell this because the leader of the municipality doesn't own the park as an individual, right? No individual owns the park. It's just public property that's owned by the community, but not by any of the individuals.
Yeah, so if we've got consequentialism on the one extreme, it seems like we've got communism on the other.
Yeah. That's not a bad thing. So Marxists and communists tend to understand the common good in this way as communal good. Yeah. I don't know if they would necessarily have to believe it. I'm not too well versed, but at least it fits. This is the one that fits most naturally with their sort of political ideas or ideals. Yeah.
whether or not they actually follow this particular line of thought, or whether they've got some other way of arriving at the same point, you can kind of see how those two ideas seem to gel together.
Yes.
And I think that's just what I was noticing.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, I mean, actually, to think of the first one that we said, that would also be like an extreme view of capitalism, would be if you wanted to contrast economic systems, because it would be each individual is doing what they want, and the market is just the sum of the transactions between individuals. So that would be like an extreme form of capitalism, where you'd say like each individual's doing their own thing, and there's no sort of oversight or regulation, would be like the most extreme in that other direction. And then the most extreme in this direction that we're talking about as communal goods would be something like universal communism or something. So the opposite of, and I've sort of given it away already, but the opposite of communal goods or common goods in this sense would be the individual good, right? Because the common is had by the community rather than the individuals in that community. So whereas with the first one, the opposite was singular good, so one versus many. This one is this individual versus the community as a quasi-individual. And you can already see the difference, because like when we say the community is healthy, we don't deny health of the individuals. But when we say this park is public, we do deny the ownership of that park to any of the individuals. So just like we said, the atomic individualist will see the most fundamental goods of society as being cumulative. The organic collectivist is the person who sees the most fundamental goods of society being communal. So that's how they would understand common good, or at least the most fundamental kinds of common goods. And so this brings us to that third class that we in the talk only gave an example of and haven't even given a name to. And I don't really have a good name for it, other than the Thomistic view of the common good. But it doesn't, it's not only Thomists who hold to this kind of common good. There's something like it in Aristotle's politics, and non-Thomists are happy to engage and or think this is a helpful category for us to think in. I don't really have a good name for it, unfortunately. So this third sense of common goods is what we might call communicable goods. So communicable is a fancy word. It gets used in theology, in systematic theology a lot. Basically, communicable you can think of it in terms of shareability, right? So what we mean in this particular case is that a good is common in the sense if it can be shared between members of a community without thereby being diminished. Okay? So that's kind of technical, but like if the idea is that if I am part of the community and I have this good and you join the community, then you can also share in this good, and I don't have to give up any of what I have of the good for you to start enjoying it. Right? And that would be very unlike some things that we're familiar with, but we'll get to that in a second. I just want to go through some examples of this. So the victory in the sports match is a good example, right? Like imagine, I don't know, somehow a team member could join the team while the victory was happening or something, right? Or
they come on last minute as a substitute.
Right, exactly. So they've worked, like they come in literally the last minute or the last second, like they participate in that victory, and you don't lose out on that victory as someone who's been on the pitch the entire match, right? So that would be the victory is a particular case of this. But if you were to go broader than like a sports team, if you were to think of like the whole of society, justice would be the like primary common good of a society, right? So that, I mean, you can think of that like if someone becomes a citizen of a country, then they get to participate, they get to join in on that justice, the justice of that community. They get to reap the benefits of it and all that kind of stuff, without you losing out on any of that justice. It's not like you have to cut up some of the justice that you're experiencing and give it to them. They just have it, like you have it, without you losing out on it. Another example that might be a good example of this, but I haven't thought about it long enough, so I'm just going to put it out there and we can think about it, our listeners can think about it, would be like a national news broadcast. Assuming your national news is good, then it would be something that you can have, and like you don't lose out if your neighbor gets a TV and starts starts listening to the national news, right? It's just something that everyone has and no one loses out because someone else has.
The example that I thought of is speaking as a parent. I love my daughter, but if we have another kid, another daughter, then it's not like now I have to share my love between two.
Yeah.
And in fact, it makes me think of what C.S. Lewis has to say about friendships, about a group of friends. And when you enjoy friendship with the one in the group, you enjoy your friendship with one in the group. And if one of those, and they enjoy friendship with the other, and if the one dies, it's not like you actually get more of the person who's
friendship.
left. And in fact, you get less, because now you have what you brought out of that person, but you no longer have what that other person did. So I'm butchering it slightly, but
I'm getting your point though.
That image from C.S. Lewis has always really struck me, and it seems like what we're talking about here. It's not something that needs to that actually gets shared around, or cut up, like you were saying, for the, I don't know, justice or the news. It organically kind of grows to fit how many people get to share in it.
Yeah, exactly. Like initially when you hear the definition, you're like, that's really strange, what could that be? But then when you go through enough examples, it's like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. Your example of friendship and love are great examples of that. Because they were, in a sense, if you were to use analogies or whatever, they are kind of like the justice within a particular small community, like between friends, or we tend to think of justice as like a cold notion, but really it's just well-orderedness and harmony.
Yeah.
So I want to close this off by giving the opposite of this as well. Not close off the discussion, but close off this section. So we said that the opposite of cumulative is singular, the opposite of communal is individual. The opposite of communicable is, well, I guess you could say incommunicable. That's not very helpful. So what sometimes people say is they call it private. So they say there's common goods and private goods. And so a private good is either one that can't be shared, or one that when it is shared, it's diminished in some way. So one that can't be shared would be like my health, right? Like I can't give you my health, no matter how much I try.
Oh man!
I could give you my illness, but
we know all
I
about
can't give you my one that can be shared but is always diminished when you do would be something like bread, right? Like let's say you're at a dinner table. If I have some of the bread, then there's less bread for you to have. Or even a communal park, a public park. If I'm taking up some of the public park, with my picnic or something, then you can't be using that part of the public park. So the public park itself is being diminished as I use it. And I think that last example goes to show, actually the examples I just gave go to show that these ideas of common goods don't all like agree with each other. Like there's like a tension. So the health, which we gave it as an example of the cumulative public good, is a private good in this third sense. And the public park, which we gave an example of a communal good, is a private good in this sense.